Chicago built its empire on rivers, rails, and steel, an unstoppable metropolis engineered to thrive. But today, beneath the skyline's shimmer, a hidden math problem is tightening its grip. $53 billion in unfunded pensions, office towers emptier than ever, a retail vacancy rate above 29%, and a looming billion-dollar budget gap. This isn't collapse. It's a quiet, structural squeeze threatening the city's future in ways most people never see. How did Chicago's greatest strengths become a dangerous burden? And what happens when the city that works runs out of room for error? Chicago's explosive rise began with a simple advantage: geography. At the edge of Lake Michigan, the city became a natural hinge between the nation's waterways and its growing railroads. In the early 1800s, the settlement was little more than a muddy outpost, but its position at the mouth of the Chicago River made it a vital link between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi Basin. By 1848, the Illinois and Michigan Canal connected lake traffic to the heart of the continent, turning Chicago into a magnet for goods, people, and capital. As the railroads expanded, their lines converged on Chicago like spokes on a wheel. By the 1890s, more than a dozen major railroads met here, Pennsylvania Railroad, New York Central, and Burlington among them, transforming the city into the busiest rail hub in America. Grain, lumber, and livestock poured in from the west, while manufactured goods and coal arrived from the east. The city's rail yards and switching stations sprawled for miles, their scale unmatched anywhere in North America. Lake Michigan's port turned Chicago into the main gateway for bulk commodities. Grain elevators lined the river, and warehouses rose along the waterfront, feeding the city's appetite for trade. Every shipment that passed through Chicago's docks or rail yards left a mark on its skyline and its budget, funding the construction of dense neighborhoods and the first steel-framed skyscrapers in the Loop. But the city's ambitions did not stop at its natural limits. In 1900, Chicago engineers completed the Sanitary and Ship Canal, reversing the flow of the river to protect Lake Michigan's drinking water. This feat of engineering not only solved a public health crisis, but also anchored Chicago's role as a logistics powerhouse, linking water, rail, and industry in a single system. By the turn of the century, Chicago's population had soared past 1.7 million, and its reputation as an unbreakable city was set. The convergence of water and rail had built a metropolis that seemed destined to endure. Growth on the scale. Chicago achieved never comes free. As the city's reach expanded, swallowing new neighborhoods, building out rail yards, and stacking more stories onto its skyline, each gain brought with it a permanent cost. The promise of modern city life meant more than skyscrapers and bustling markets. It meant a commitment to maintain the roads, bridges, schools, and services that kept the city running. Every new mile of streetcar track, every water main, every schoolhouse added another line to the city's ledger. By the early 20th century, the city's leaders began making promises that would last generations. Police, firefighters, teachers, and municipal workers were offered security in retirement, with the earliest pension commitments quietly written into the city's obligations. These promises, while small at first, grew alongside the city's workforce. As Chicago's population ballooned past 1 million, the scale of its public sector and the benefits guaranteed to it became a defining feature of city life. Pensions helped shape that reality. The equation was simple. More people meant more services, and more services meant more workers. But the other side of that equation was less visible. Each new benefit, each long-term contract locked Chicago into future costs that would not shrink just because the city's fortunes changed. The city's infrastructure, too, was built for a giant. Its water system, transit lines, and public buildings sized to serve millions, not easily downsized when the economy slowed or industries moved on. Infrastructure determined how rigid those costs could be. This is the hidden trade at the heart of every big city. The power and pride of scale come bundled with obligations that endure. Chicago's legacy was not just its skyline or its rail yards, it was the permanent cost of being a city built to last. For every new resident welcomed, every block annexed, the city's future math became a little more complex. The result is a modern metropolis that still carries the weight of every promise made in its era of growth. Legacy is part of that weight. If you want more stories about how big cities rise and how they quietly get squeezed by forces most people never see, subscribe to Cityfall. Downtown Chicago's office towers once hummed with weekday life. In 2025, that rhythm broke. For the third year in a row, the city's central business district ended the year with office vacancy at a record high. Officially, more than 1 in 4 office spaces stood empty. This was not a temporary blip or a pause between booms. The data shows a structural reset. Before 2020, office vacancy in the Loop hovered in the low teens. By late 2025, it had climbed to a range between 24 and 27%, far above anything seen in decades. Class A buildings, the glass and steel anchors of the skyline, still managed to keep about 4 out of 5 floors leased. But for older Class B towers, vacancy soared above 30%. Some buildings once prized by law firms and trading companies changed hands at a fraction of their old values. In one case, a major downtown tower sold for $55 million after fetching $230 million 6 years earlier. The reason behind these numbers is clear in the city's daily patterns. The rise of hybrid and remote work after 2020 cut the flow of commuters that once filled the trains and sidewalks every morning. Fewer office workers meant fewer people buying coffee, fewer lunch meetings, fewer crowds in the lobbies and elevators. Even as some companies renewed their leases in premium spaces, many downsized or relocated, leaving behind large blocks of empty floors. Negative absorption became the new normal. More space was vacated than leased each quarter, especially in the older towers that struggled to compete with newer amenities. This is not just about empty desks. Every vacant floor means lost property tax revenue for the city as building values fall and owners negotiate lower assessments. When vacancy rates stay this high for years, the city's tax base shrinks and the pressure on municipal budgets grows. The numbers tell the story. In 2025, downtown office vacancy did not just set a record, it cemented a new reality. The weekday density that once defined the Loop has thinned out, and the consequences ripple out from the towers to every corner of the downtown economy. A walk along State Street in the middle of a weekday tells a story that numbers alone cannot capture. Where there were once packed lunch counters and steady streams of shoppers, vacant storefronts now stretch block after block. The Loop's ground floor retail vacancy reached 29.78% in 2024, according to the most recent Loop retail report, a figure that would have seemed unthinkable just a decade earlier. For small business owners, the change is felt every morning. The usual crowd of office workers, students, and tourists has thinned. Foot traffic is unpredictable, and the midday rush that once anchored sales has faded into a trickle. One shop owner who has run a sandwich spot near Adams and Wabash for years describes the new rhythm. Some days, the line never forms at all. Rent negotiations have become a monthly ritual. Landlords, facing their own pressures, offer short-term deals or let spaces sit empty rather than lock in lower rates. The ripple effect is everywhere. Fewer customers mean less revenue, and less revenue means hard choices about hours, staffing, and even survival. This is not just a business story. It is a matter of civic confidence. Ground floor retail is the layer of city life that everyone touches, whether they are running errands, grabbing coffee, or window shopping on the way to work. When nearly 3 out of 10 storefronts are dark, it sends a signal that is hard to ignore. The mood on the street shifts. Visitors wonder if the city is in decline. Investors hesitate. Even longtime residents question what comes next for the heart of downtown. Behind every empty space is a chain reaction. Fewer office workers lead to fewer retail customers. Fewer retail sales mean less sales tax for the city. And as the retail layer thins, the sense of momentum that once defined the Loop starts to slip. The Loop's retail vacancy rate is not just a statistic, it is a daily reminder that Chicago's downtown economy is being tested in ways that go beyond the towers and the skyline. For the people who depend on those storefronts, the consequences are immediate and personal. For the city, It is a warning that the budget math is tightening, even if the sidewalks look busy on a sunny weekend. As the pressure grows on small businesses, the city's financial strain deepens. The next challenge comes not from the street, but from the numbers inside City Hall, where rising costs and shrinking revenues are colliding in ways that affect every service Chicago provides. Inside City Hall, the numbers tell a story that is harder to see on the street. Chicago's total unfunded pension liability stands at $53 billion, more than the entire annual budget of most U.S. states. That figure is not just a distant warning. It is a present reality that shapes every decision the city makes. According to the Civic Federation, pensions and debt service now consume roughly 40% of the city's budget. That is not a one-time spike, but an ongoing drain. In practical terms, for every dollar the city collects, almost half is already committed before a single pothole is filled or a police officer is paid. The city's property tax levy, already the highest among major U.S. cities, does not go to new services or ambitious projects. More than 80% of those tax dollars are routed directly to pensions payments. Since 2014, nearly every property tax increase has vanished into the pension system, leaving little left for anything else. The result is a city that can feel stable on the surface, while the basic math behind the scenes grows tighter each year. The budget forecast for fiscal year 2026 lays out the challenge in stark terms. It shows a projected gap of $1.15 billion between what the city expects to bring in and what it is required to spend. That is about 9% of the entire city budget. Closing a gap of that size cannot be done with small cuts or one-time fixes. It means real choices, raising taxes, reducing services, or borrowing more, each with its own consequences. A Civic Federation analyst explains the logic. When you are spending 40% of your budget on pensions and debt, you are not making choices about what to fund. The math is making those choices for you. The city's operating fund, which covers everything from libraries to sanitation, has been raided repeatedly to keep up with pension payments. In 2019, the city transferred $136.8 million from the corporate fund to cover pensions. By 2025, that figure had ballooned to $943.4 million. Even with those transfers, the funding ratio for Chicago's four main pension funds remains near 25%, far below the national average of 78% for state and local pensions. Peer cities face pension costs, but not at this scale. New York and Los Angeles devote 17% and 11% of their budgets to pensions and debt, respectively. In Chicago, the crowding out effect is visible in every budget pie chart. For every new dollar of revenue, nearly half is already spoken for by past promises. The city's ability to respond to new problems, invest in infrastructure, or even keep up with basic services is squeezed by obligations that cannot be renegotiated or postponed. The trap is clear. As legacy costs grow, the margin for error shrinks. When a city's future is shaped by the math of its past, every new challenge, whether it is a drop in property values, a spike in service demand, or a downturn in the economy, lands on a budget that is already under strain. The next pressure point comes when essential systems, like public transit, are forced to compete for shrinking resources. Chicago's transit system stands at a crossroads, shaped by forces beyond the daily commute. Weekday ridership on the CTA and Metra remains well below pre-pandemic levels, even as weekends and special events bring bursts of activity. In 2019, the CTA averaged over 1.5 million weekday rides. By 2024, that number hovered closer to 1 million, with no sign of a full return. Federal emergency funding, first through the CARES Act and then the American Rescue Plan, has kept buses and trains running, but those dollars are running out. A senior CTA finance official warns that when the relief money dries up, there is a gap we cannot close with fares or routine belt tightening. The consequences reach far beyond the tracks. Transit is the circulatory system of Chicago's dense neighborhoods and downtown core. When service is cut or reliability falters, the effects ripple outward, making it harder for workers to reach jobs, for students to get to class, for families to connect across the city. An urban economist at DePaul University notes that every drop in train frequency or bus coverage changes the equation for who can participate in city life. For many, transit is not a backup plan, it is the only option. This is what experts call the fiscal cliff. As emergency aid tapers off, the CTA faces hard choices: raise fares, cut service, or seek new funding from a city budget already stretched thin. Each option brings trade-offs. Fewer trains and buses mean longer waits and more crowding, which in turn can drive even more riders away. Higher fares risk pricing out those who depend on transit most, and with property taxes already at record highs, the city's ability to step in is limited. The stakes go beyond numbers on a ledger. Transit is a barometer of Chicago's broader health. When ridership falls and service shrinks, it signals that the city's downtown and neighborhoods are drifting apart. The perception of decline can become a self-fulfilling cycle. Headlines about service cuts and empty stations reinforce doubts about downtown's future, making businesses and residents more hesitant to invest or stay. Even as the city's overall population remains steady, U.S. Census estimates for 2024 show Chicago holding near 2.7 million. The composition and momentum of that population are shifting in subtle ways. Yet the story is not all warning signs. Chicago's strengths continue to draw people from around the world. The Art Institute, the Field Museum, Navy Pier, Millennium Park, and the city's renowned universities anchor a steady flow of visitors and students. Neighborhoods like Pilsen, Lincoln Park, and Hyde Park pulse with local businesses, restaurants, and street festivals. Sports teams fill stadiums, summer festivals crowd the lakefront, and world-class hospitals and research centers drive innovation. These strengths are real and visible, offering a counterweight to the narrative of decline. Chicago's challenge is to keep these strengths connected, to ensure that transit, downtown, and the neighborhoods move together rather than drift apart. The city's margin for error has narrowed, but its assets remain formidable. Whether the system can adapt before the math forces sharper choices will define the next chapter in the city's long story. Chicago's future now hinges on how it solves a problem measured not in headlines, but in math. $1.15 billion in projected gaps, 40% of the budget is locked in debt and pensions, and nearly one-third of Loop storefronts are empty. As the numbers tighten, every choice shapes what survives. The real test is not collapse. It is whether a great city can adapt before the math decides for it. What would you do in Chicago's place?